Now it is really coming down to the wire in the United States. In just hours from now, voting will start for the midterm elections. Democrats and Republicans are in their final stretch of the campaigning. These polls will decide who will run the Congress. The US Congress has two chambers. First, the House of Representatives. It has 435 seats in total, and all of whom are up for election. Second chamber is the Senate, where out of the 100 seats, only about one-third are being fought on. The results will set the tone for the next 2 years of Joe Biden's term. If it concludes with a strong Republican showing, it could upend many domestic and even foreign policy plans. The midterms are also important for state-level polls. This time, governors' mansions are also up for grabs in 36 states. State-level lawmakers, secretaries of state, and attorneys general will also be decided. Now let's come to the key issues of this election. Concerns related to the economy have become a top priority for voters. In most states, the views are divided along partisan lines. Since the 2021 Capitol riots, democracy and election authenticity have come under question. The Democrats have been constantly touting this midterm as a way to save democracy. Abortion rights continue to resonate strongly for Democrats, while Republicans are more focused on current jobs and immigration. Then there are more common issues that flare in every election season, like education, climate, public safety, and gun control. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are not running in this election, but you will see them in most visuals coming in from the United States. They are rooting for their party candidates, but the focus has been more on the 2024 presidential election rather than the midterm elections.
Today we face an inflection point, one of those moments that comes around every 3 or 4 generations. We know in our bones that our democracy is at risk, and we know that this is your moment to defend it, preserve it, protect it, choose it. Democracy is on the ballot. Political violence and intimidation are on the rise all across America. And you remember January 6th, the angry mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol, attacked law enforcement, hunted down elected officials, erected gallows to hang Vice President Pence. Well, West's opponent supported that mob.
I ran twice, I won twice, and I did much better the second time than I did the first. Getting millions and millions more votes in 2020 than we got in 2016. And likewise, getting more votes than any sitting president in the history of our country by far. And now, in order to make our country successful, safe, and glorious, I will probably have to do it again.
Now, the midterms take place 2 years after a presidential election, so it is seen as a referendum on the performance of the sitting president. However, it also is a litmus test on the opposition. The Republicans are monitoring their own base and also how many of them could change their vote to red in the next presidential election. Past trends show that fewer voters typically cast ballots in these midterms than the general elections. Now, to understand the projections ahead of the midterms, correspondent Susan Tehrani gets us this report from New York.
The 2022 midterm cycle has at times felt like a roller coaster. For example, we've seen glimmers and signs that the Democrats might buck the midterm trend, notably during the summer after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, where Democrats and their party sort of had a momentum. However, Republicans have been closing in fast on issues regarding inflation, the economy, and crime. Now, something of a nuance perhaps on Capitol Hill and less talked about is, and although we don't know what will happen after polls close, but should the Democrats not really gain many seats in the House and the Senate, it doesn't mean that the Dobbs decision was not important. Many analysts believe that if that Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court was not taken and abortion rights was not on the ballot, perhaps the Democrats would have lost even more votes at the end of the day. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
Now, to discuss on this further, we are being joined by Elizabeth LaRouche, who is a political analyst and an author from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the broadcast.
Hello.
Now, elections in the United States are known to be polarized, but this year there is American democracy, the economy, abortion, inflation. I want to ask you, how do you see the voters assessing these issues?
The voters have been paying keen attention to this election. These midterm elections, as you know, are a referendum on the party that occupies the White House. Some midterm elections are more lackluster than others. This one has fired people up across the political spectrum. You know, a lot of people are very upset about the economy, about inflation, about crime in American cities. On the other side of the political spectrum, they're concerned about the Dobbs decision that the Supreme Court decided in June of this year. And so everyone has something that is compelling them to come out and vote. And it's very, very competitive. Just this week, it seemed as if the Republicans were pulling ahead and have a very good chance of picking up quite a number of seats in the House, getting a majority in the House of Representatives. And then now it does look like the Republicans will pick up a seat or two in the Senate and then regaining control or majority of the Senate. That seems to be rather late breaking. And so it's been very competitive up until this point. As you know, President Biden's approval ratings are quite low. So that has been a real drag on the Democratic candidates. And let me tell you, each side is coming out fighting because each side thinks that they can do the best they can this year.
Right. Now, the campaigning in the last few days, as you also mentioned, has become more to do with the 2024 presidential polls. If we see through that lens, I want to ask you, how do you think the two parties will fare?
It appears that a number of the candidates that former President Trump has supported are doing well. Some of them have tied up their races when they were lagging behind a couple of weeks ago. And so they've either tied up, they've pulled ahead a little bit, or they're within the margin of error. And those races are nationwide. We're talking about J.D. Vance in Ohio, Laxalt in Nevada, Herschel Walker down in Georgia, Yesli Vega here in Virginia, and possibly Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. And so just recently, I'm saying in recent days, it does appear that those Trump-supported candidates are pulling ahead of where they were and have a real fighting chance to win. If they do, now everyone's watching those contests, as well as gubernatorial races. In New York, there's a chance that Lee Zeldin will win the governorship there. There's not been a Republican governor in 20 years there. In New Hampshire, there's a very, very hotly contested race. And so if the Trump supporters win, then it's going to give a pretty good indication that people will kind of run over to the Trump side when they run in 2024.
Right. Elizabeth, now a lot depends on who runs the Congress, right? But shifting the focus from domestic politics, I want to ask you, how do you think a Republican-heavy Congress will impact on the U.S. foreign policies?
That's a very good question. I think that you will see a lot of consistency in U.S. foreign policy. I believe that you will see a lot of consistency regarding the U.S. policy toward China. Both Republicans and Democrats appear to be on board on the same wavelength. They believe that China is a major competitor and a challenger for the United States as a challenger to U.S. national security. So I think that you will see China policy the same. I believe that regarding Ukraine, you will continue to see U.S. support of Ukraine. You may see Republicans pull back a little bit on more intervention. You know, the problem with international conflicts is countries get drawn more and more into the conflict. You might see Republicans pull back a little bit. I think the biggest area of change you will see is regarding the climate. The Biden administration has been very, very supportive of international climate initiatives. I think you'll see Republicans pull back there a little bit.
All right, very interesting points made there by you. That was Elizabeth LaRose from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us on this broadcast.